This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
Dave on the board, and it is October the 11th, 2015. Gorgeous day outside. The views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers. It would be a great day to get outside, bicycle a little bit, just walk around, go to a park. I'm amazed all the time when I find all these tiny little parks in this community, and I did not even know that they were there. I'm out bike riding, and you just kind of look down a side street, and there's a small little one. You know, it's about the space that you would put two houses on facing sides of a street or something like that, and that's all it took for them to put in a neat little park with some slides and paths to bike on and stuff like that and walk.
Yes, it's good out in the field too. It's good harvest time and a little bit dusty, but it's interesting to see the landscape go from 12-foot corn to almost naked, and it's an interesting change. We do things on most of our stuff is environmentally oriented, so we talk about what happened during the week, and I had two prominent people pass this week, and there's a certain closure about passing, but there's also a bringing together of community in many cases. One was Bruce Larson, and another one's Pat Barnhart, and both those people had been heavily involved in the community, and I missed the Larson funeral because I just didn't read it in the newspaper in time, but I'm sure that it was a well-attended funeral. And so let's say something about these people. Bruce, his name is Larson, and came probably from Scandinavia in the first place to northern Minnesota. He shortly after he was born, his family moved to Chicago, and he caught polio. So sometimes you're dealing with pretty dramatic things. They moved back to Minneapolis from Chicago, and the polio got healed, and Bruce survived that. He eventually got a master's degree and a PhD from University of Minnesota, and came to the University of Illinois as a professor in nutrition and biochemistry, and involving dairy science in the College of Agriculture then, and looking at the biochemistry of milk production and using of isotopes to follow chemicals through. So he published probably about 140 papers, books, and was an academic in a real sense, but very friendly sense. I met Bruce first when I came from Australia to a science fraternity, a graduate fraternity called Gamma Alpha, and he was there. Some of his students were there probably, and he had an interest in that organization. But Bruce was very much involved with the university. He was chair of a lot of committees and membership of others. He was chair of the Athletic Association before it was incorporated within the university. And so he had a lot to do with that sort of thing. He was on professional committees that were selecting chancellors and other people to be employed with the university. So he had quite a deal of status. He had a Fulbright in Argentina. He traveled to places like Russia and India, and had wife, Marjorie, and 3 children, one of whom he lost, but others have continued to benefit from the activity of parents who are very involved. Sometimes they feel a little guilt because their career will take them away from family sometimes, but sometimes the children grow up to be self-involved, individualistic, and they benefit from their parents' activities. Bruce was involved with the YMCA. At times was chairs. At times was CEO, in charge of things, and from that end, he met with a lot of people. He was an outdoor person, so he belonged to groups like the Isaac Walton League, and was chair. He was 50 years member of the Isaac Walton League, and they do a lot of interesting environmental things. It's a group that's very different in different places. It may be more a club in Chicago. Here it is more an environmental group. He was a member of the Exchange Club, which is an attempt to get people together with an interest in this case, he was at the Urbana Exchange Club. He was 42 years with the Urbana Park District. 33 years of those where he was chairman of the Urbana Park District. During that time, he increased the number of parks, and it was always very friendly to go to a park meeting and hear the interactions and some of the things that Bruce has been involved in will be continuing for a long time. He was a member of the Illinois Park Districts, and as such, he founded a risk insurance policy, which 350 park districts belong to now, and it's saved a lot of taxpayer expense for insurance for park districts. He was also a respected member of the National Park Association, and he received many awards, but it was just the human being that was very helpful, and over, the human being is associated with family and wife and children and extended children, and that's very meaningful in this community. I will later say something about ACE Awards, which have some of the same sort of elements. The next person I want to say something about is Pat Barnhart. She was born in Crossville, which is way down there south, probably not too far from Evansville, near to New Harmony, and to a farm family. She did a great degree and met Harry Barnhart, who had a farm. The family had a farm just at the end of Ray Street. So if you go down Ray Street today, you will see a big sign that Soil and Water Conservation District has. There's a prairie there, and part of that was part of this family. They had 6 children, all of whom have done interesting academic things or other things that are helpful. I came in contact with them early because a school teacher, Dr. Barker, was teaching a summer school program at Urbana High School, and Donald Barnhart was there, and he had them come to a field trip on South Neal Street when there was a Kroger's there and when there was a Hillcrest Lumber, and we introduced young people to the prairie. We were moving it from adjacent to the railroad line, where a whole lot of prairie was hidden behind a V-shaped billboard that you could see from both directions. And that billboard had harbored prairie that was on the side of the railroad line for many years and no mowing. So we had a little field trip up there until they decided to develop Hillcrest, and we took those plants across to an area that Larry Warden Martin Motors, felt they had a site there, probably about 3 acres, that wouldn't be utilized for about 10 years. So we transferred the prairie elements of the Hillcrest area across the road to the site and eventually Larry Warden called me up and said, "You were sitting down. I just sold the prairie to Walt Cunnington." So we moved the prairie, and some of that prairie went to the Barnhart Prairie, some of it went to Lake Park, some went to individuals. But we almost felt like we had to genetically develop wheels on prairies where we moved them around. So Donald was there, and when Route 45 was widened, he brought a tractor from the farm and dug up some of the cordgrass and a lot of other species. So he had on the farm rows of different prairie plants. And then he ordered up, he decided to put about an acre of prairie in, and the family had to be in agreement with this. And we went to the Wade family in northern Illinois that has good native species, and so they gave us enough seed we bought enough seed for an acre, and Donald helped plant that, and Harry, the father, put some energy into that and understood it. We put evening primrose around just to denote the area. Evening primrose grows quickly and acts like a little visual fence, just in case it got accidentally mown. And that prairie exists today and looks over the area that drains into the Ombra River, and you can see Savoy in the distance. We shared some people who work for us, Jim Zimmerman especially, and collected seed, and then they put in plots of big blue stem, Indian grass, little blue stem, so that they could be harvested. Jim would collect the seed, and others would help. And there was at one stage an attempt to get 400 acres of prairie, but that hasn't quite happened yet. At the early start, you could stand and look at the Yankee Ridge behind the farm, and you wouldn't see a building. You could imagine a prairie. It had that rolling nature of the Yankee Ridge Moraine. So now, today, the Barnhart family has about 100 acres of prairie, and all the members of the family have been interested in it and helped do visual interpretation of it. The grandchildren have been involved, and when Pat passed, contributions can be made to that prairie. Some of it has been taken over by the Soil and Water Conservation District, and there's a notice on it. If you go to Church Street, Savoy, and if you go down Ray Street, you come to an end that meets with Church Street. Well, there's a little lane that just goes into the Barnhart Prairie, and it's part of the university's expansion of the South Farm by 8 square miles, but the prairie elements have been designated for preservation in perpetuity. So they're safe, and every so often they have to be burned, and so community people have been doing that. Some people who don't understand the burning are surprised that the prairie is being burned, but you have to explain that lightning would strike the accumulated litter of a prairie periodically, perhaps 2, 3, 5 years, and that litter gets burned, and the creatures and the plants that are on it get used to that burning regime, and as a result, they get disappointed when there's no burning. So if you leave a prairie unburned for some time, it will gradually diminish and not be very healthy. So burning is part of the act, and you can see it. People see it when they go down Ray Street or come up Church Street. Church Street comes from Savoy and goes up over the face of the Yankee Ridge Moraine, and then down the gentle backside to Sydney. So the Barnhart family is on that Yankee Ridge Moraine and has to deal with palmate drainage that comes off that into the Umbra. So I've known the family for a long time. Harry got together with Dave, uncle, and Dave Smith, and they modified the combine so that they could harvest prairie seed, and the plots are still there, and they can be harvested for seed and increase the prairie. Code grass went into the more damp areas, and that's a prairie that can be visited, and it's the sort of place where people have a wedding occasionally. You can go there and watch the sun go down, see the elevator at Savoy, and it's kind of very much Midwest. And the family grew up there with very active parents. Pat eventually got a PhD in educational psychology. Harry had a counseling job in Monticello and had degrees to go with that. And the family has been very active in many, many ways. And they have included me often in some of their family involvement. Like I went to Donald's graduation at the Beef House in Indiana. I remember going to Christmas dinners and to other events where the family gets together, and they were together yesterday in royal fashion. So very informal ceremony at the Christ Church on Daniel Street, Daniel and 6th. It used to be a congregational church. At Karen, one of the daughters, is a reverend there, and she officiated. But the 6 children were all there, and Mother knew that she was to go, so she kind of organized that this would be a fairly informal event, and that grandchildren will all place a sunflower in a bucket on the stage. She loved horses, so there was a picture of horses there, and all sorts of animals, and then the public was given very small votive candles, and they were all placed on a table where eventually Pat's remains were dedicated, and just following that there was a dinner where people got together. I took a plate, but I hardly could eat because I was meeting various people who were associated with the family, whether it be through University High School, where 4 of the children went, whether it be with music, the children, now adults and doctors and the like. Trent played the piano, and his teacher was there. It was the name of Kachachurian, which is kind of interesting that we do have people who have names that go on for many years. And so psychologists were there, and just general people who were sporting people or people who had something to do with the family. Eventually, Pat was, she was at the University High School for some time. It's interesting that people, adult people, get to use that at lab school and come through with that appointment for 2 or 3 years and often end up within the university framework. Pat ended up with a professorship at Eastern Illinois University, and then when she retired, she spent 10 years with a rental group that was dealing with children that had difficulties. And so I kind of appreciated being there, and I know some people don't necessarily like to go to funerals, but they can be a very friendly event, whether it's Bruce Larson or Pat. That's enough. I think I want to say that there was another event that I found to be very friendly, and that was the ACE Awards. This was the art people. It used to be there was an art organization which eventually continued as the local orchestral organization. It had music and art, and it sort of disappeared for a while, and then 40 North came as another attempt to put an art foundation together. And it's run for several years now, and each year they present a number of awards. And this year it was in not Fat City, but Champaign City. It's a very new big building behind, between Green and Springfield, sandwiched in between Neal Street and the railroad line. But it's a huge theater with projections possible, and quite friendly, I thought. They gave awards for a teacher, Rusty Clevenger, obviously someone who was wanting to work with children and give them an opportunity to express themselves. Often people don't think that they can do art or music or what have you, but you give them a chance to try, and all of a sudden their eyes pop out and they start to get interested. So he seemed to be that sort of teacher. Carolyn Baxley, who runs the cinema theater in Urbana, her husband seems to think it's her hobby, which it is, but it's much more than that. And she works with the community artists that we have, and also brings in artists. And it's amazing that what used to be a cinema theater is now an art gallery, and it survives. It's not easy to survive galleries and museums are going out of fashion, or not going out of fashion, they're just not receiving enough money to survive. So the Air Museum in Rantoul, the Chinook Air Force Base Museum, is going out of action, and over and over it happens. The museum we had on University Avenue, Historic Museum, had to back out. We nearly lost the building that the Historical Society is in on First and University for the same reason. There's often too few people who are doing community things. Everyone is very busy. We had a volunteer named Brenda Koenig, and something of the same sort of thing, working with the Folk and Roots Festival and other things, just rather wonderful. Then there was Weiskamp, silk screening, and that went as a group, and he had on stage all his employees, many of whom get experience their silk screening. They do interesting things. Once again, it's how do you get the community together. Then there was a student, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but Rodriguez, and she's doing a PhD in art history, and it was felt that she was an excited person, interested person, a little frenetic perhaps, but doing what we want to see doing. Then there was Nina Paley. She was the artist, and Nina is a cartoonist. I don't know whether you call her an cartoonist, but animated storylines that are absolutely marvelous. And she has decided to stay in this community. Once again, she had parents like we've been talking about. Her father was a mathematics professor and also mayor of Urbana. And I'm sure that these people who have parents who do interesting things have a hard life when they're children, but they end up benefiting greatly from the family association. So we applaud Nina. And then we finished up with Harry Breen, who got a Lifetime ACE Award. And he was a painter and a sculptor, and often did things by accident. Somehow he got into making sculpted pieces of animals, and somebody said he ought to do that. And he tried and then did it. And then he got involved in Holy Cross Church and remodeling Holy Cross Church, and that was an achievement. But in there someone where he was also employed at the lab school, which was University High School, or Uni High. And he was there for a few years and then was invited to be professor of art, and he was professor of art for many, many years. And he had a lot to say, and also had family. He had a Catholic background, and he wanted to say something about that, and that was nice. Both David and I were listed as people who were nominated, and there was a little blurb on the visual thing of us both. I'm not quite sure where they got the photograph, but the photograph of me was, I had a bouffant hairdo. It was a photograph taken by Siemens some years ago, but it was there, and David had a write-up too, and Carolyn Baxley was pretty definite that you should walk out of that building with a contribution, because it's hard to do these things. It's hard from another point of view. Is often if you're a community person in the arts, you're also thinking about philosophy and you're transferring information. And if it's someone like myself, you're dealing with biology as well as art, and it's so you have this melding of art and education and science, and it's hard to fund that because it's hard to define who's who and what's what, and it's almost like an amoeba. You can be an artist at one stage and your amoebic leg goes out in that direction, and another time you might be an engineer or a mathematician or a psychologist, and how do you measure those, and how do you have a committee of adjudicators who can cover those various fields? Not easy, but friendly, and I was pleased that that happened. So let me look at my notes here now.
And while you do that, it's about 5:30. It's actually 25 till the top of the hour. You're tuned to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. It is October the 11th, and you're listening to the Prairie Monk, as always. You hear it this time on Sunday mornings here on WEFT. And if I can just take a quick moment to say thanks to everyone who made a pledge during the fall pledge drive. We didn't quite hit our goal. We would love for you to go ahead and make a pledge, even though the drive is officially over. Anytime you don't hear us talking on the phone, we have a stack of pledge forms here, and you can give us a call at the station, 217-359-9338. And 24 hours a day, even if there's nobody here at the station, you can go to our website, weft.org, and make a contribution directly online there. So please, if you can, we would love to have your support, your contribution here today.
So we've been working with the Pocket Prairie. Denise Courier has been out there with me, and we've been removing invasive trees which persist. And it's interesting, that little prairie. I recently put up a sign which said Pocket Prairie, and that has been a curiosity to some people. They have been walking past it. There was one gentleman I talked to. He wanted to say something very positive about that prairie. He'd been a WEFT air shifter for many years, and he had never really looked across there till he saw a sign which said Pocket Prairie, and he wondered what that was. But he has since then been over there quite a few times, because he and his wife enjoy that spot. I had another person who saw it and was a photographer and wants to come back and do that sort of thing. Last night there were two people sitting on the stoop outside my place and looking at my window and to Heartland Pathways and ERES, and I think I could tell by their look that they were kind of curious as to what went on here. So I gave them a very short field trip to the Pocket Prairie with the flashlight, and that sort of thing goes on all the time. Sometimes there's a a little bit of an attractive nuisance because people like to hang around there, but it also does a lot of educating. So this week we had a friend from Cisco and Decatur, Ron Sleater, came with Jill, and he wanted to show her a prairie. She has a little prairie at Cisco, which is on the way between Monticello and Decatur. It has been put in as largely a grass prairie. It has been very typical for people to put in a grass prairie because a grass prairie looks like what people think of as a prairie. It gets to be 8 and 10 feet tall in the fall, and it gets to be nice fall colors and waves its wooden leg in the breeze, and it gives people the impression of a prairie. But we wanted to say, Ron and I, to Jill, that this prairies involve a lot of other plants. There are like 110 prairie plants, plus all the all the fauna that is in there too. And there are lots of associations, and when you take it out and put in corn and soybeans, you lose those associations. So we first went for a field trip to the Pocket Prairie, which sort of makes me think that I should really have out there a sign which explains what the Pocket Prairie is about, because I think people think it's just an urban niche, which is quite fun in its own way without the prairie element, but it would be nice for them to know a little bit more about the prairie. So we went around the prairie and looked at the plants in the street, and then we went to Rantoul, because from Rantoul to Paxton there is an old road which we would love to see as a bicycle way through the prairie. A little bit worried if we open it up, does that open it up to the people who don't necessarily have too much involvement with the vegetation unless it's explained. So you almost need an Anita Purvis Center somewhere nearby that would let people know what is happening. And I think that was exciting because Jill had not necessarily seen some of these species and seen a compass plant that faces north and south and allowed settlers to find out their way around the world without having to realize that they've moved 100 miles but they're back on their own doorstep, because that's the way their brain works. So this plant could do things like a plant that's called equisetum or horsetail, and it has a lot of silica in it, and the settlers would use it as a scouring pot mitt. And so just little things that we used to do and could be done again. That's if we have some of the prairie left. So we went to Pope Prairie. It's time for picking seed, and Ron is interested in seeing that Jill's prairie is augmented with broadleaves. So various plants are available at the moment for picking seed. Compass plant, dock, the grasses, the clovers, the culver's root, just a lot of seed is ready to be picked. So we picked some seed and distributed some seed, especially on a spot that has been used for agriculture, which we're trying to return to a prairie near to a remnant that's across the way. And that road, old concrete road, goes 10 miles. So we went up to Paxton and saw purple gentian, which is a rather rare plant, and that was enough for an introduction. But Jill's Prairie is very near Cisco and Monticello, and we're hoping that she and her husband, who's an engineer, might help to put that corridor into a natural area that can be visited by people who we hope understand it. That means we need to put railroad ties on the trestle bridges. We need to perhaps make it a very narrow trail, 4 feet wide, and a one-way perhaps, so you go in to Allerton Park and do a circuit, so that you don't have to have a very wide trail, so that bicycle handlebars won't clash with each other. And we have to hope that people don't do wheelies on the side with motorcycles or bicycles. And I think we're safe. It's going to be a hard time because we have a new library going up on one end of the trail and a Monsanto barn across the road from delicate creatures like purple gentian. And once again, information is helpful. We have to think more and more about the people who create the board that look after these places. How do you go to the next generation? How do you ensure its in perpetuity? That takes talent in an era when there's not a lot of young folk compared with older folk. So older folk help a great deal, but they're going to pass on, and we need the contiguity here, a continuance into several generations. So the plant you plant today might be the plant that's preserved 500 years in the future. So I think we've got some time to do what I was wanting to do, and that is to tell you something about the plants that might be harvested at the present time. If you go down to Windsor Road or Route 45 or Lake Park or places like Barnhart Prairie, the grasses are there. Now, we don't want you to take over grasses and grow grass prairies. We like to have a balanced prairie. But the grasses are ready to be harvested at the moment. One of the easiest ones is Indian grass. It has a feather duster on the top, and you can take your hand and move the seed off and preserve it. It has a shelf life which is quite considerable, and it doesn't have to be put in a freezing paradigm, which is what happens to many of the broadleaves. So Indian grass is there. Indian grass will stay up in the prairie for a while. You have to realize that we're talking about natural history which looks like weeds to most people, but there's an elegance to Indian grass. So if you go along Windsor Road at the moment, you'll see that there has been a no-mow on the outside 12 feet, which is very good for us. That's the first time when we put that prairie in. We were working with 7 jurisdictions, and they wanted the prairie because there's a ditch nearby that couldn't be restored to fast-growing roadside plants like brome grass. So we put in prairie, and then after 20 years, it's doing its thing. But when the organizers, the funding people, the 7 agencies involved finished the job, the site was handed over to Champaign City, and there was a feeling that the advance edge should be mown. So a lot of the expensive plants that were on that edge have not been able to express themselves very well. There was a sign that was there, and it was put up horizontally or vertical to the prairie, to the road, so that people could see it from both directions. It cost $1,000 to sandblast the sign on both sides, but for some reason it was turned around so that it now parallels the corridor, and people don't see it very well. But if you go there now, you'll see the Indian grass is tall and could be harvested, and the big blue stem is tall, and the little blue stem. The big blue stem, let me say something about that. It doesn't stay up quite so well as the Indian grass. It will fall over as if you had a bunch of skittles and they fell in an array around your hand, and you picked up the skittle and you got 10 points for that and 2 points for this, and depending on the color. So that is how big blue stem looks at this time of the year. If you're going to harvest it, you can harvest the whole plant as a sheaf. What you do is you gather it up in your arms, and then you take your boot and kick it, and it breaks off at where it joins the ground. Normally that forms litter. If you take it, that sheaf of vegetation can be used for thatching roofs, and that's what the native population used to do with it. Modern day restorations use the same principle, but big blue stem falls down like that, and for people who like a neat and tidy mown area, it looks ugly. You have to have a mindset that is oriented to and understands the prairie. The third grass that is available at the moment is switchgrass, and it stays up all winter and is very much encouraged because it can harbor pheasants, and the eggs can be there, the nests can be there over winter. So it has a fruiting body which is a panic. That means its little fruiting stems go every which ways, and they're also good food, and so the other grasses. Little blue stem is a shorter grass, and it likes to grow in a drier place, and if you pick a sheaf of little blue stem, you can put it through, you can rumble its seed off and use it for planting, and it's rather elegant. All these grasses are clump grasses. They don't spread horizontally, all except cordgrass, which likes to be with its feet in damp water and grows very tall. It takes about 10 years for the seed to express itself. It puts down deep roots first, but it has rhizomes underneath, and so if Don Barnhart takes cordgrass for a wet place in the Barnhart Prairie, then that is dug up. If we wanting to do it, we'll go to a place where the cordgrass is somewhat expendable, and we'll pick up clumps of cordgrass roots, and they will grow, and you'll have some instant gratification. These plants these grasses grow fairly quickly and fairly easily. Indian grass, you can get it to grow in one season. The other grasses are slower. They're putting down about 1 mile of rootlets underneath the ground, and so you don't see the result, the upper result, very quickly. Now, that's an introduction to the grass side of things. There's some little grasses in there too, which are almost ornamental, but they're nice. But come to the broadleaves. There are probably about 12 broadleaves that are relatively easy to distribute, and they're of varying degree of rarity, but you can get a rough prairie with about 12 species, and there are indicator plants like lead plant or culver's root that would say, if you were looking at it from a moving car, you could see these plants and you could know that is a native prairie. So you try to simulate that if you're dealing with a cornfield or your backyard. And so let's look at some of these. First, one that intrigues me is culver's root. It has a candelabra type fruiting body, and it's kind of green at the moment. It still hasn't kind of hayed off, but it's an elegant plant, and it likes to be in a little bit of dampness, a bit of water. And it takes about 5 years to form its roots and come up. So if you dipsy-doodle that seed into an existing grassland, it will probably be about 5 years before you see it. Lead plant. Lead plant is just about ripe at the moment, but lead plant, sticks on. Its seeds stay there. They don't fall off immediately. So you have a few weeks to be able to harvest lead plant. Monarda is something the same. Monarda is a balm for bees. It's called bee balm, B-A-L-M, a balm for bees. And so help me when the bumblebees are there on flowers that are usually mauve, sometimes red, but mostly mauve. And the bumblebees just love the aromatic. It's a mint, and it's aromatic, and they like the pollen as well as the nectar. So I just lately have been picking up the seed heads, and you can usually deal with that by putting them in a cardboard box and putting your foot on it and crunching them up, and out will come the seeds. And I put them in places where I know, like at Pope Prairie and Rantoul, we have monarda or bee balm on the prairie remnants. So we need to put a little bit more bee balm on the prairie gravel pit where there's not very much of it. So there is Liatris. Two types of Liatris. It wasn't quite ready to be picked when we had 50 students just a while ago, but it's there, and you can milk it. It's like a plume called gay feather, one of them, and you can harvest that by milking it, something same way as you do Indian grass. You can't harvest too much of it. You can't grow too much of it. It is fairly ubiquitous. That means it's common. And when I am sending seed to Prairie Moon, they have enough liatris. It's rather productive. It starts at the top of the flower and goes down, and not all of us are ripe at the same time, but there's enough of it that it's common. There's a button liatris, and it's ripe at the present time on 45. I was pleased to be there last night, and it just looks wonderful. So then there's grey-headed coneflower that has a petals. Cone just means the petals laid down backwards. Yellow coneflower, the seed is ready to be harvested, and the purple coneflower is certainly, it has fell out a long time since, and you can pick it off. With these creatures, don't try to pull the plant up, but rather take the head and twist it, and it will break off, and you won't take up the bulb that's underneath or destroy the root system. Purple coneflower has something like a 4-foot root system. There's bush clover. There's which grows tall, and you have to work at it to get the seed out. David has been helping with New Jersey tea. But when you're picking these things, we're almost there. Remember to watch for poison ivy, because I was sitting with Ruth Walker last night, and she had gotten poison ivy, and it's an accumulative poison, so it gets to you as you age, and kids can sit in it and not be too bothered by it, but certain kids get allergies to it, so be very careful as you pick some of these seeds, and increase your little prairie in your backyard without necessarily having a lot of shade. It's the end of the session. We'll get back to you again. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, and thank you for listening.
And Dave on the board. And as always, the views and opinions expressed are solely those of the speakers and no one else.